Okay, welcome back. We're going to pick it up from where we left off the previous time. Let's go ahead and I'll stop the PowerPoint. Now, if you've looked at the course outline, you're going to have to pick a sermon to preach and have recorded for submission. And we're going to go through all of the stages in that sermon's development from picking the subject, complement, exegetical idea, writing the outline, going in and filling in the sermon manuscript, introduction, conclusion. And so these are the sermons that you're going to pick from. You're going to pick a sermon from this list and from this list only, as indicated on the course outline. Not a sermon that's not mentioned on this list. Just one from this list and from this list only. The ones that are bold and underlined, those are the ones that in a previous lecture I actually go over the subject, complement, exegetical idea, and outline as examples. And you may, just in case you pick one of those, you'll actually get to see those done in class, what the subject, complement, exegetical idea, and outline will look like for those. On the course website, there's a PDF file from an article entitled Sermons Most Likely to Succeed. If you haven't read it already, pause the video and take about 15 or 20 minutes to read that article, because we're getting ready to just point out some highlights from it. That's what the article looks like when you open it. Sermons Most Likely to Succeed, from a worship and preaching magazine article. And they did some research. When it says succeed, it's talking about sermons that is producing over the course of time, week by week. The preacher is preaching, the pastor is preaching and teaching, feeding the word, and what types of spiritual transformation, what type of spiritual growth is taking place. And so what kind of behaviors are happening in the challenging task of spiritual formation reveals the following characteristics. And the article by Dr. Lori Carell mentioned four key metrics. Successful sermons ask for change. And it says successful sermons are built around a clearly stated change-based goal that emanates from the scripture. We talked about that in H. Grady Davis's illustration that he gave for preaching, the actual sermon growing from the soil. Instead of being something that is constructed, it's something that grows from the soil. And if you have a sermon with some change-based goals that actually emanates from the scripture, and you're asking to see that change, asking to see that spiritual fruit, or whatever the text is dealing with, that is one of the ingredients for a successful sermon. Another thing, very important, is successful sermons are organized for listening. There's a structure to it. One of the things that the research revealed was when asked what makes a sermon difficult to process and remember, the number one answer from listeners was disorganization. You know, the pastor was saying some good stuff, the preacher, the minister was saying some good stuff, but it was just a lot, you know. And then she has some of the sub points that basic components of sermons organized for listeners are an attention-getting opening to focus listeners' thinking on a clearly articulated subject, a specific spiritual growth goal delineated in the introduction, 2 or 3 connected, memorably worded main points, conceptual links between the main point that move listeners from one idea to the next, a concise review that doesn't include extraneous information, sermon that's going all over the place, that and miscellaneous information that just threw in to make the preacher sound smart, or whatever, whatever miscellaneous reasons that preachers throw in extra information. A compelling final statement connected to the spiritual growth goal. organized instead of being disorganized. And then another third was that successful sermons are well delivered. Illustrations, the preacher preached, tone, all those things come into play. And the fourth one was successful sermons integrate listeners' perspectives. That means that the sermon is relevant. Um, it's addressing something that is a real life issue, that the people are getting a word from God on the matter. You have all of those ingredients. Those are all the ingredients needed for a successful sermon. So I want you to read that article, keep it with you, and some good stuff in that article. Now I want to play a testimonial from a local Jacksonville pastor, and he's gonna, when you listen to the testimonial from Pastor H.B. Charles, entitled "The Beautiful Struggle," and he's talking about sermon preparation. So I want to play that clip from the Preaching Today website that he has, and I want you to just listen to some of the things that he says on it. It's a 2-minute video. Turn the volume up just a little bit to make sure.
One of my biggest struggles in my weekly preparation is that I'm more inclined toward the research part, the study of the text, meditating on it, learning as much as I can. And at some point, you have to let that part go and start working on the construction of a sermon. And you only have so much time in a given week. And I think my problem from week to week is that I spend a lot of time with the text, but it's late in the game, Friday, Saturday, sometimes, before I let go. There's always one more commentary I want to read, another article I want to read. And I put my favorite commentators at the end to kind of discipline myself. So I'm working my way to them. And it's late in the game often that I turn to putting my sermon skeleton together, and then around that I write a full manuscript. So this is a regular struggle for me. It just happened to me even last week as I was working on Psalm 93. And I didn't get really to the sermon construction part till Saturday. I didn't think about an outline and all of that. And I feel like the sermon could have been much more tighter. So I think I just need to schedule my time, but I have to work where at a certain point I have to let it go and give myself a deadline that on Thursday I need to start writing. And then if around that there's more reading I want to do, that's it's not a deep solution, but it's what I'm trying now, to give myself more time to construct the sermon, because I believe key to effective preaching is not just faithfulness to the text, but clarity in the presentation. And the goal for writing out my manuscript is that I want it to be clear. I don't want there to be a fog in the pulpit. You don't have to agree with what I'm saying, but I don't want you to misunderstand. Even if you're going to disagree, I want you to know where I stand, what the big idea, what the meaning of the text is, what the flow of the idea is. I don't want those to be confusing. And that takes time as well, just as much as working on the exegesis of the text. So I'm trying to play a little mind game with myself. That if I start writing on Thursday, I can do more reading on the other side if I have time, to help me do better in constructing the message for Sunday morning.
Okay, and so let me go back to the PowerPoint slide that we have here, and just notice some of the key phrases he uses in that. He uses some of the same verbiage that we're talking about from the Hatton Robinson, exegesis, and actually the outline of the text, and putting together the sermon skeleton. And then he said his struggle is actually going from the study to actually constructing the actual sermon, going from the actual outline to the actual sermon. And that takes time as well. It takes just as much time as the exegesis. When you're doing the exegesis, you're doing just context, the then and there, which is what all of you've done so far. But then you have to transition to the actual sermon, the actual homiletics, How does it apply now? And that's the part where he says he has to put together a plan to actually get to that part a lot sooner, because that part you can have a lot of good study, but you didn't actually package it in a way to where it is clear. And he said one of the things that happen, you can have a fog in the pulpit because it's not tight, it's not put together. And so that part takes, the actual sermon takes some meditation, some study, some reflecting, and asking God to help you make it as clear as possible and actually communicating the actual sermon. And in addition to his testimonial, I want to give my quick testimonial, because my struggle is almost, I want to say, the opposite of that. I began as a young minister teaching Sunday school, and I had a job as a college faculty member that allowed me a lot of dead time. In between tutoring college students, I was just there in the office, and I spent at least 2 to 4 hours a week preparing to the Sunday school lesson. My motive was I did not want to not know. I had a class full of adults that asked questions. They were not afraid to ask questions, and so I used the book that I used was the Union Press Sunday School book, and I used the Bible Expositor and Illuminator edition, which has a lot of information, a lot of background, exegetical information. For example, this is from years ago, 2014, 1 Corinthians 6:12 through 20. And they titled Glorifying God with Your Body. And they had an introduction, which introduced the text, and they have some very good writers. They would talk about the text. They would give you a whole lot of background information. That is key to just give background information. They were outlined with outline titles, and they gave a exposition verse by verse, and I would go through and look at all of the different things that it talked about, and that this is one of the things that drove me to want to know my Bible well, to know the background, and eventually God opened the door for me to go and attend seminary, graduate level seminary, and I was later able to add more tools to my exegetical study. But so exegesis for me is something that I can do fairly quickly, fairly easy. But the part that just like H.B. Charles was saying, Pastor H.B. Charles, the sermon preparation, actually putting a sermon from the after you're done with exegesis, is still a struggle. Even though for me the exegesis part is a little bit easier. And I want to conclude this lecture by putting a re-emphasis on the previous point made by H. Grady Davis. A book or class on the craft of preaching cannot teach its reader theology and exegesis. You have to know a good deal about both already, and so spend as much time as you need to studying those passages to try and make sure you understand it, and then put together the outline before you can put together a sermon. So I'm going to stop this lecture right there.